everybody. Welcome back to the Bubble Podcast, the podcast that explains what the hell is happening in Spain and how to be a part of Spain. Today's episode is a great one. We sit down with the Swedish ambassador to Spain to discuss things that you did not expect we'd be discussing. We also break down the controversial regularization of migrants here in Spain and what it actually means. And we also have a great guest. Elizabeth Duval is here with us today. She is a Spanish novelist who's going to be discussing politics, identity, and where Spain is heading next. Remember to follow the podcast, leave us a rating, consider becoming a paying subscriber. The Bubble is sustained with your contributions, and this is what keeps us going. So if you want to access exclusive content, please consider paying us. Today we have a very special guest, Per-Arne Hjelmborn. Did I say it right?
I think you have it perfect.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Ambassador Hjelmborn is Sweden's ambassador to Spain since 2024. And before arriving in Spain, he was Director General of Trade at Sweden's Foreign Ministry and has served as ambassador in Brazil and Malaysia. He's here today because we want to talk about a recent campaign, No Somos Tan Suecos, or No Somos Tan Secos, which plays on that classic Spanish stereotype that Swedes are cold, they're serious, and maybe a bit dry. But the data tells us a more interesting story. While a lot of Spaniards still think Swedes could be a little cold, most also believe that a Swede would absolutely help them if they got lost in Stockholm. So today we're going to talk stereotypes, culture, Spain and Sweden actually have in common, and why maybe, just maybe, Swedes aren't as secos as some people here may believe. So Ambassador, welcome and thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's really an opportunity to have the possibility to talk with you about our campaign about Sweden and Spain, stereotypes, and what we can do more together.
Absolutely. We have a lot of questions, and as I mentioned, I'm from Mallorca. In Mallorca, we have a lot of different bubbles. One of them is the Swedish bubble. Lots of Swedes living on the island. So I am very much aware of Swedish culture. But let's just start with your campaign, right? Where the idea for No Somos Tan Suecos /Secos, where did that come from? Was there a specific moment when you thought we need to challenge how Spain sees Sweden?
Well, in a way, you can start there, but I would like to start a bit further away in the sense that, I mean, as an ambassador and as an embassy, my role is to promote Sweden and Sweden's interest in that particular country here in Spain. And in that sense, the country image, the country branding name is important for you. And there you often end up with the stereotypes or the perception that other countries have about your country. And I'm very happy to serve as a Swedish ambassador because Sweden often in international rankings, we end up high up when it comes to innovation, creativity, sustainability, and these things. But at the same time, we know, of course, like Spaniards know the stereotypes of Spaniards, that we have them here in Spain about Sweden. So we wanted to play around with that. And that's how we started with this campaign. And it builds on a campaign we did last year, as you probably heard about, where we also played with a stereotype or Spanish expression, hacerse el sueco.
Yeah.
But we linked it with sort of a serious message that we said, when hacerse el sueco de verdad, to make yourself as a real Swede, you care about environment, you care about sustainability.
Right.
So, and we got the message through, and we worked sort of with the communication campaign, sort of outside the traditional platforms, a seminar, a delegation.
It worked really well on social media.
Exactly. And that's why we thought that this was an idea to build on the stereotypes of Sweden and also play around with humor, because that's also part of Sweden.
Yeah.
And the idea came across perhaps a bit surprisingly when we were approached by the Prado Museum. And they said that they wanted to commemorate the 400th anniversary of Queen Christina of Sweden.
Right.
You might ask, what does the Queen of Sweden have to do with Spain and the Prado Museum? It happens so that in the Prado Museum, you have an extraordinary collection of sculptures that was actually collected by her, the Queen.
I did not know that.
Queen Christina, when she lived in Rome. And it, through the Spanish monarchy, ended up in Spain 200-300 years ago, and now it's in the Prado Museum. And that queen, for anyone who's interested in history, and I think even European history, she's an iconic queen. She represents freedom of thought, a very sort of far ahead of her time, intellectual freedom, patron of arts and culture. She was iconic in Rome and Europe at the time, and represents some of the values which are not so much connected to the stereotypes of Sweden. So we wanted to play around with her representing the culture, science, intellectual freedom with the stereotypes that Spaniards might have in Sweden.
Yeah, this is a pretty unusual campaign for an embassy. If you go to your website and you see the campaign behind, where you have an actress who is playing her, and who is talking about these differences between Spain and Sweden, this is not something that you would expect to see coming from an embassy, right? Or from an ambassador. And yet, this is something that resonates really well, especially with the audiences that you're targeting.
Yes, so far. I mean, it's just 2 weeks. I think we've had more than 3 million views on our campaign video, which is...
That's insane. That's really good.
Insane. But I think, as you say, it's a bit unexpected. But it's also part of my job to promote Sweden and Sweden's interest. And to start a conversation which is built on something which we know exists. Because in addition to the campaign, we built it on a survey. So we asked 1,000 Spaniards. You were quoting some of the results. And it sort of confirmed the stereotype, but also the fact that huge majority of Spaniards would be happy to ask a Swede if they're lost in Stockholm. Yeah. And they would expect them to be helped by the Swede with a smile to find the right location. So there's a contradiction there which is very sort of interesting. And we wanted to build on that and to start a conversation.
Absolutely.
And to work a bit with tools that are not so traditional. So that's why we sort of promoted this video. And we did that last year as well, another one, which if you haven't seen it, I should encourage you to go in there.
I will. No,
it's also sort of a bit humoristic.
I'll check it out. I think that's the best way to try to reach, especially the younger generations, which are so used to consuming this kind of information on social media that may otherwise never go to an embassy's website, or consume anything that comes from the political world. So I think it's a fantastic way of reaching them. It's also a great way to stop or to get rid of stereotypes, right? So if we're talking about stereotypes, what would you say? We know what some Spaniards think about Swedish people. What would you say is a stereotype about Spaniards in Sweden?
Well, I think those are the ones that you probably think about yourself. I mean, you're sort of creative souls, you're built on inspiration, not so planned, not so dull. I mean, sunny Spain is always coming up. That's the stereotype. But I think, we have more than 20% of Sweden's citizens go to Spain every year for vacations. So I think many of them have learned that those are the stereotypes that are sort of old. I think they are changing now, that they see a much more modern Spain. Industry, services, culture, gastronomy, which is a true nation of culture.
Yeah. I personally love the concept of fika.
Yeah.
Which is, I hear that it has no literal translation into English, but it's basically like a break that you take in the afternoon to drink coffee, eat cookies with friends or coworkers.
Exactly.
And it's something that you do.
Social cup of coffee.
Correct. Social coffee. Can you think of any other habits from Spain that we could export to Sweden?
You have already exported them, but in the sense the tapas culture and the sobremesa culture, that's fantastic. I mean, the gastronomy and the way you interact with food and wine and what have you, coffee, what is, of course, something that we love. And that's why we come and visit you so often. And I think it's if you see Stockholm today and look back 40 years, you see that it's growing also in the big cities in Sweden. You've been there yourself.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that 40 years ago, but I think we're incorporated that traditional culture as well. But then, of course, the prices are a bit higher in Sweden than in Spain, which means that you have to be a bit more careful when you interact too much in Swedish restaurants and so on. But I think we're learning a lot from your way of interacting, spontaneous way. Swedes are a bit more planning.
Right. Yeah, we're pretty chaotic that way. But we like it, and it works.
And I think the mix is perfect.
Yeah.
Because I look at myself, I have a pretty sort of structured life. My calendar, whenever I look at it, is just, I have the possibility to give priorities and so on and so forth. But you have to have a certain space for you to be able to improvise as well and in the structure.
I agree. You mentioned how cities change over time. You were here in Madrid 20 years ago?
I was here 1990 to 2002, yes.
Have you seen the city change a lot since the last time you were here?
Yes, I would say. Talking about gastronomy, it's more restaurants than ever. The culture offering is enormous. It's even more cosmopolitan. It's more international, more tourists.
Yeah.
But I still think that Madrid keeps the essence of Madrid. It's still Spanish. I do understand in some cities in Spain that you have a discussion of whether you found or not the right balance between tourism and authenticity. But here in Madrid, I still think that the balance is still. But I think Madrid is extremely attractive for tourism and also for business and for visitors and international conferences and so on.
No, we're seeing the kind of radical change that we've seen in the city in the last 10 to 15 years has been incredible. It really has become a world-class capital with such a cultural offer that is becoming increasingly attractive to people from all over the world. This is why we're seeing it get gentrified in a way that it brings good things and also bad things. But it's interesting to see how much the city has changed in the last couple of decades, especially for someone who spent some time here so long ago. I was not here at the time, so I haven't seen it change. But it's interesting to hear how people say that it's changed so much. Is there anything from Spain that you feel that has been too strange for you to take on as a habit? Is there anything that you feel that this is way too different to your culture that you would never be able to adopt it as your own?
I don't think it's to ask a diplomat. I mean, we're used to having lived in Beijing or Kuala Lumpur. I mean, Spain is still Europe, and it's very easy to and with all the fantastic assets that you offer, I don't see. I mean, I can compare if you talk about my last period here, and I was here then with my wife and two small kids, and of course the dinner time starting at 9:30 to combine the work-life balance with kids. That's a bit of a challenge. But I mean, we lived at the time in Pozuelo de Alarcón. I remember getting from office, and I had my bedtime stories with the kids.
What time was that? What time do you have dinner?
Yeah, but in Sweden you have dinner. Oh, it was two dinners basically, because then I had the official dinners in the evening. I would Spaniards. So I went back to have sort of the family dinners like 7:00, and then bedtime stories. That was sort of to keep our kids grew up in everywhere. I was very sort of eager to keep the Swedish and so on, reading Swedish bedtime stories. And then, like, leaving house 9-ish for Spanish dinners and coming back to my house at 1:00 in the morning.
Because that's the one thing that in Sweden I can never get used to. Your dinner is too early for us.
Yes, but I think also I think we've adapted. If you go back, Sweden, sort of in industrial Sweden in the 70s, dinner time was like, I remember when I was a kid, dinner time, the parents came back like 5:30 or even 5 dinner.
Wow.
And then, I mean, especially in the big cities now, I mean, it's probably more 6, 7-ish.
Yeah.
And for Friday and Saturdays.
And that's been changing now?
It's gradually. I think if you go with your friends for dinner in Sweden now, it's more like 7-ish or 8-ish. And 30, 40 years ago, it was more 6:00 or something. So we've adapted. But so the dinner times are perhaps the ones that you need to struggle with, especially if you have young kids. Now, as grown-up kids and my wife, and so
I guess you have to get used to it. Speaking of getting used to it and living here, you speak good Spanish, right?
Me defiendo, sí.
Are you... Me defiendo. See, you speak good Spanish. Are you a consumer of Spanish pop culture, for example? Do you watch movies, television from Spain?
Yes.
Do you follow any TV shows,
Not too much TV shows. I mean, it has to do with my work as well. I mean, evenings are events, a lot of things. Probably more sort of following social media, reading stuff than... I'm not a heavy TV consumer. If you ask my wife, she says, because if it's linked to football or sports, then I tend to find time.
Right. No, it's...
The World Cup at the moment.
And sometimes it can be really confusing. We have a style of humor and the way that we create information and consume information is also very kind of like...
I've seen a lot of well done. I've seen...
there you go. So you do...
to understand what people are watching. But I wouldn't say that I see it every...
You don't know who Belén Esteban is, for example?
I do.
You do?
I do, because she was big when I was here last time, 1999. That was at the time when... My wife, she was a regular consumer of Corazón, I think it was, and she was married to this bullfighter.
Yes.
Whatever.
She's the people's princess.
That I know.
She's very big in this country. She's very much loved too. I'm sure she's going to be happy to hear that you know who she is.
Come to think of it, we must engage her for our campaign.
We should.
Queen Christina.
Oh my God.
What do you call her?
The people's princess.
The people's princess.
Yes. I mean, if you wanna reach the Spanish population, please just put up a campaign with Belén Esteban. I can guarantee that everyone will be talking about it. She is gold.
I talked to my team to see if you can, if she would be interested.
I know that you're pressed for time, so I just have 1 or 2 more questions, and then I'm gonna let you go. But where do you actually see that the biggest opportunities are for both our countries to work more closely together in the coming years?
You want a political answer now? Because this, I mean,
It
my
could
job,
be, you can be political, you
Yeah.
can be like
but if
as general as you want.
if I link it to the campaign, though, I was starting saying thing about sort of the brand of Sweden, the country, and the idea why we work with the nation brand of Sweden is, of course, that we want to attract Spanish interest for Sweden. Spaniards to go for tourism in Sweden, to invest in Sweden, or to work in Sweden, or to buy Swedish products and services and so on. So, of course, that's one of my key priorities to work with that part of Sweden. But then you come into more sort of political areas like, I mean, defense and foreign policy issues, which are key for us. Sweden recently became a member of NATO, and with support from Spain, by the way. Work closely in the, of course, the foreign security policy areas are key for us, and the rest of trade and economics and so on. But also, speaking of people to people, I mean, we have, like, as I said before, 20% of the Swedes, meaning 2 million Swedes visit Spain every year, which is huge. And of course, that means also that...
And so many others who live here.
Exactly. 100,000, and many of them in Mallorca, by the way. So, of course, our consular tasks are quite important, or very important. So those are the key areas for us. And I think there are lots of opportunities. I mean, Spain in the south is part of Europe, and Sweden in the northern part. But we often tend to find a common ground and work. And that's also an interesting way, because if the northern country of Sweden, Spain can find common areas, that's also attracting interest in Europe. Well, look, the Swedes and the Spaniards have brought a new idea. That's probably worth looking into, because if these two countries can find a common idea, that's something that sort of stimulates others to look into that. So I often meet both Swedes and Spaniards who say that they like to work with each other. And I don't know if it's this mix of sort of planning, strategy, innovation, and creativity and we are good team workers, team players, I think.
Absolutely.
So
we share a lot of common goals.
We share common goals, and we have chemistry seem to work.
Yeah.
I can't say exactly why, but I think it's often I see the results. And I see that in different areas, in academics, in the business world, in cultures and so on. It's often very positive.
I agree. Ambassador, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Tack så mycket.
Hopefully you'll be with us at some other show and we can talk more. But
thank you so much.
See you soon. Thank you.
So we recently had the news that 1.2 million people applied for a mass immigrant regularization program here in Spain.
Lots of people.
Lots of people that had been just a few months ago sort of quickly put together at the end of last year or the beginning of this year, which is A, a lot of people, but B, is more than twice the government's original estimation of 500,000.
Right. But this is something that we saw coming, right?
Course. And we saw coming it would cause a lot of political infighting, or not infighting, outfighting between the two different sides of Spanish politics. But it does beg the question, why the mass regularization? Why was the estimate so much different than the final number? And are the people who applied following the rules as laid out in the regularization, or were they sort of pulled in by the possibility of getting Spanish residency?
Well, I think first of all, if the government, let's just say that the government knew that this number was going to be over twice what they said it would be, I think that the psychological barrier of hearing that over 1 million people are going to apply to this is like a lot, right? So maybe they said 500,000 because they thought that, right? Maybe they felt that 500,000 would be, or sound...
500,000, I don't even mention the word million.
Right, yes. 500,000 would be definitely less invasive, for lack of a better word, than almost 1.2 million. Now, I think we still need to see how many of these people who applied actually get what they're hoping for. Because by the time we're recording this, I think that only from all the applications that have been processed, I think that only 1,000 have been accepted. Now, we still need to see what the final number is, but just because 1.2 million people applied doesn't mean that 1.2 million are going to get it, which, in case it needs to be clarified, I think it must be clarified to avoid confusion. This is not citizenship. This is not naturalization.
You have to go through the same as anyone does.
Right. And the goal here is to give these people a work permit, right? So they are
a residency comes with a work permit.
Yes, they're able to work. Yeah, but still you need to wait 2 years to get citizenship.
Or 10 if you are not
or
from
10 if you're from the US.
If you're like me.
Like you had to wait 10 years,
I had to wait
right?
10 years.
And if you're from Latin America, you need to wait 2 years.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that automatically the people who get this applied are going to become citizens and they're going to be able to vote. This is not something that is going to happen. So
I think first we should maybe explain super briefly what exactly this is.
It's a work permit.
What the offer is.
It's work permits. It's theoretically grabbing the people who were undocumented workers in Spain, so they were already working here.
Who'd been here for 5 months.
Who'd been here for at least 5 months.
By December 31st.
Correct. And who were trying to get or become a part of the system legally, right? What this is giving documents to the undocumented workers.
And in theory, and by the rules, don't have a criminal record.
Yes, correct. When you add all of this to the equation, you need to see what the final number is. Again, it may not be 1.2 million. It may be much lower. And then why is this happening? That's the other question that you asked. I think that it's happening because Spain needs workers. And I am no economist, but so far we have seen that a big part of why Spain continues to grow and the economy of Spain is growing while many other countries in Europe are lagging is because of migrants in this country that are helping the economy grow. People in Spain are not having kids. We are aging very quickly. We need new people who can be a part of the system and who can pay taxes, because otherwise I don't even know how we're going to be able to pay pensions in a few years, right? So in theory, I'm not against this idea at all. I think it's a good idea, especially if these are people who are already here. Right? I am so tired and so frustrated. All these things that people on the right are saying about how this is going to bring a lot of people who are going to start voting and vote for the left, when in fact, these people may, first of all, they cannot vote yet. And second, we don't know who they're going to vote for. Maybe they're going to vote for the right. So we don't know that.
I would guess people, honestly, who left Venezuela,
they're not going to vote socialism.
They're not going to vote for socialism.
Correct. So I think that there's a lot that we still need to see before we can take an educated guess of how many people are going to become a part of the system.
No, I do think, that said, why is it such a bone of contention between the opposition and the parties in power?
Maybe racism is one of them. I think that if you listen to the narrative coming from, especially from the far right, from Vox, this is the Muslims taken over, right? It's the people saying that the people from Morocco or North Africa are invading, and they use the words, right? They're invading Spain. There's more mosques than churches in Spain, and that kind of all those false stories that create this sense of urgency that horrifies a part of the electorate, right? When in fact, I think that from these 1.2 million people, only 13% of those who applied are Moroccan. 67% of the people who applied are from Latin America, with Colombia being the #1 country. So I think that there are some valid arguments. People who say, well, if you want to be a part of the system, then you should just do everything legally or try to get a work permit legally. But as Pedro Sanchez
can't go back in time.
Correct. As Pedro Sanchez said, these people are already here. They are already working here illegally. So might as well just make them part of the system and get them to pay the taxes that they're supposed to be paying.
I think it's also worth noting that there have been other regulations, both under left and right-wing governments.
True.
There's difference, though. There is some significant differences.
Yes.
Which is, one is in the past, they had to have a job, and then their employer said, we would like to continue employing this person legally.
Right.
And then that is not part of this regularization.
Right.
And there was, in the beginning, there was an assumption that if people couldn't find their paperwork showing that they had no criminal record, they would sort of take I swear I have no criminal record oath.
It's not really that's not really a thing.
If you're a criminal, that would be easy to lie, right? So there are some issues that make it different than the previous ones.
Yeah.
And then let's just talk about the numbers, not just the estimate and whether it was intentionally kept low not to scare people or whether they just thought it was 500,000 or who knows. I know there was one of these foundations thought it predicted to be 800,000, right? And they were also low.
Yeah.
And then the police had different numbers.
Yes, they said that they expected that it was going to be 400,000 people more than what the government originally said. So they estimated 900,000. But from those 400,000, I think 200,000 were people who came here just for that, right? Efecto llamada, basically, which is the pull effect.
Right. Would be either people just trying to come over and get fake papers, or maybe someone had a family member here and they said, I'll just move in and we'll backdate the rent, the lease to show that I was here beforehand, even if I wasn't, and so on and so forth.
Right.
And do you think, the question is, we'll find out, of course, to some point, if that's true, but depending on how many people are rejected or how many people, can't prove their presence. The presence is very hard.
Yes. I think that the issue here is we should be looking at the big picture, right? What's happening in the world and the fact that people are not having kids. Mm-hmm. Why are people not having kids? It's not because they just don't want to have kids. It's because they cannot even afford food for themselves. Why would they even want to have kids? So how is this going to affect Spain in the coming decades if we don't bring in these people who are just going to keep the labor force active?
Yeah.
Is my question.
It's a constant, it's a push and pull. Yes, the labor force will grow. I have no idea how qualified the white collar workers or blue collar workers or the waiters or scientists or whatever. Probably more waiters than scientists, just that's how it usually goes. And then the second generation and so on. There'll also be like a demographic rush of people, especially in big cities, which will probably push up housing prices, which will not encourage more people to have kids because it'll be even harder to buy a house.
Right.
So, it'll increase the economy and probably put money in Social Security. And then at the same time, it may make housing even more difficult, hellacious for a young person or someone who doesn't have a lot of resources to enter.
The government has announced that it's going to be spending around €500 million, an integration and citizenship plan that includes language classes, employment assistance, vocational training, stronger public services, and a new agency to coordinate migration policy. I think that something that benefits Spain in a very big way is the fact that almost 70% of these people who are applying, they come from Latin America, so they speak the same language that we do. That is a huge advantage because these are people that do not need to learn a new language. They can already, as soon as they become a part of the labor force, they can already start working immediately. There's no language barrier there.
There's also interesting, I think, sort of special case that is Spain compared to, say, France or Germany or something like that. Because even the far right in Spain doesn't object to Latin American immigrants.
Right.
This is not like Donald Trump with Venezuelans or Cubans.
Well, I mean, they tried to kind of like maybe see what kind of effect they would get if they came out against them. But this is not convenient for them, right? Because a lot of people who come from Latin America, they would actually vote for the far right or for Vox.
Absolutely. I mean, Milei is president of Argentina. Somebody voted for him there. And Cast is in Chile. And I mean, you can go down the list.
Absolutely.
But what I think very interesting, whereas in other countries, they don't have like colonies with whom they have good relations.
Right.
That Spain sort of does. So, I mean, most of the focus that the far right has, like you said, is, like you pointed out before, is on Muslim immigrants, you hear a lot about the Pakistanis and the Moroccans and whatever, as if there's like massive boats coming in.
No, again, that's the thing. It's if you look at the numbers, most of the people who may have arrived
were Latino,
which means that they came here by plane, not by boat, right? They're not coming from North Africa or from Morocco or crossed over to the Canary Islands, etc. So
what was the other 20%? Because it was 13% Moroccan, 67%.
I think that it's kind of like miscellaneous, but I think after Morocco, Peru is 8%.
No, I mean, you said 67% were Latinos.
Yes.
And then 13%
Then
Moroccan.
13%
So
Moroccan.
80.
Yes. And the rest is just all over the world. But I remember that the third group was Peruvians with 8%. And then I don't remember the rest. But yeah, it's mostly people from Latin America.
Now there's a full number of Ukrainians, just because a lot of Ukrainians left.
Yeah, I didn't see that on the list. No Ukrainians. No Romanians too.
They're going back because Romania is doing better.
That's true. And then
all right, let's talk about the La Ley de Nietos.
Oh, yeah. It's very controversial now, even though it wasn't until a couple of years ago.
Explain exactly what it is.
Ley de Nietos is basically a law that was passed here in Spain that says that if you were a descendant from a Spanish citizen who had to move to abroad, especially Latin America, because most of the people left for Latin America during the Civil War or before, then
I think during Franco, I think.
Yeah, of course. After in the 50s and 60s. If you were a citizen, your grandfather was a citizen, then you could apply to Spanish citizenship. Not residency, but citizenship. And a lot of people did. I believe that Argentina was the first country that got
1.5 million.
Cuba was second.
800,000.
Yeah. And a lot of people did get a Spanish passport. Many moved to Spain or Europe, any other state. And now suddenly that is a controversy because, of course, those people vote. But
actually very few of them vote.
Very few of them. I think it's around 7% or something like that. So it's not like everybody abroad is voting. But now mostly Vox, the far right party, is trying to get rid of that.
Because they advance in franchise abroad.
Correct. They say that, I think that the system that they were using as an example for mailing ballots is the one in Cuba because this is a system that is part of a public company in Cuba that handles the votes. And they say that it shouldn't be trusted. Mainly what they say is that when you cast your ballot, they're not asking for an ID, which I don't know if it rings a bell, but it's very similar to what a certain orange menace is doing in their assets. What they're saying is we should not take any votes from abroad. because we don't know if these people are voting legally. The Partido Popular, which is the center-right, who traditionally has supported this
and wins the election.
Wins the elections because they vote for the Partido Popular abroad. They recently came out, Alberto Núñez Feijóo, the leader of the Partido Popular, recently came out and even made it sound like he was in agreement with Vox, which was quite a change of heart comparing it to what he said a few years ago when he was very happy to have that.
And then he clarified it. So now, and now it makes no sense.
Correct. Which just sounds exactly like what he would say. Right? So there's this debate now about mail-in ballots, which again, it sounds more like it's the kind of debate that you would hear coming from the far right, not just in Spain, but in many other countries in the world where they're trying to cast doubt on the mail-in ballot system as something that is not to be trusted and that is open for tampering with.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm excited to see how many of the 1.2 million get their actual residency. And anybody, readers or watchers who are interested, please leave us a comment on what you think of the mail-in.
If you're part of it, let us know.
If you're a part of it, if you vote, and also what you think of this this fight over the regularization, the nationalization.
Man, what a nightmare.
Welcome back. At The Bubble, we don't just want to explain the news in Spain. We also want to help you understand the people, the society behind the headlines. That's why I'm really happy to have a very special guest today, Elizabeth Well. Welcome to The Bubble.
Thank you for having me.
She's a writer, she's a philosopher, also one of the most brilliant and influential young minds now in Spain. You've spent a few years outside of the country, and obviously during that time, the country has gone through lots of changes, right? Our cities look different. The people living in those cities in our country are also very, very different. And you wrote about how when you live abroad, also you get to understand your country and see it from a different perspective, which is something that resonated a lot with me. If you were to explain Spain to someone who just landed in our country, someone from a different country, or maybe someone who's a Spaniard who's lived abroad for a few years, what do you think would surprise them the most?
Yeah, we're kind of talking about that, and the 2 times I think I ask about this experience of being from Spain and going to live somewhere else, and coming back and what that means and how everything changes, and also how your own relationship in a certain way to the country kind of changes. Like, I went to study abroad when I was 18 to Paris, to France, and I lived there for the next 4 years and came back when I was 22. That wasn't really so long ago because I'm still going to be 25 when this interview comes out. So I don't really have that much of an experience to compare, or I can only compare between like really small segments of time divided. But I wrote about that once in a book called Melancholia, an essay, and also for the Spanish issue of this fashion magazine called Dust. And what I said there in a certain kind of way is you really only grow to appreciate a country like Spain when in some way you've been far away from it or you've been abroad from it, and you get to experience what it's like to miss it and to certain elements of Spanish culture that in a certain way you took for granted before, and that was something that is constituted kind of your daily life, what you consume, and suddenly you're surrounded by things that come from other places, by things that are foreign to you and you don't really understand. And then you have this kind of nostalgia for the place where you came from. But the Spain I came back in 2022, wasn't really all that different from the Spain I left, at least in the case of Madrid, which is the city or the place I can mostly compare it to. I've seen the difference grow in a certain way in the last few years, like the transformations of the city, even if the essence of Spain very much remains the same. I think also comparing it to other European countries, for example, it's one of the most open, it's one of the most welcoming. I just think it's true that we have a Spanish way of life that differs from what you would find in France or in the United Kingdom or in Germany, for instance. I do think the Spanish spirit regarding, for example, partying or living in the streets or socializing or opening a friend group to somebody who's never been here is different from anything you'd find like elsewhere, anywhere else practically. But the thing with our cities is precisely because of that, in a certain sense, in the last few years, they've become more massified. The way more tourists all the time coming to Spain and seeing Spain as an attractive place or hotspot to go to. And there's also been whole phenomena of expulsion of Spanish people and neighbors who are living, for example, in the neighborhood I live in. I live in Lavapiés, very close to the center of Madrid, and you can really see this phenomenon evolution of this gradual expulsion of neighbors who've lived there their whole lives, making place for tourists or for making the place or neighborhood kind of a tourist backdrop or just like a scenery that in a certain sense undermines the essence that was behind it. So I think Spain really still has a lot of what made it and makes it a really wonderful country, a really particular country also in Europe that's at this crossroads between Latin America and Europe. I think you really cannot understand Spain if you take it as a country belonging to Europe. You really have to take into account the Latin American perspective to it. It's really become kind of an international hub for people coming from all over Latin America, but one that's also dealing with all these sorts of growing pains or of becoming something bigger.
Like you mentioned, for instance, like mass tourism, like even challenges like gentrification, like
Yeah.
our cities are changing very rapidly, right? And sometimes like we even hear like, oh, Madrid está de moda, or like Spain, España está de moda, right? Like it seems like everyone wants to spend some time here as a tourist, as an international worker here. Do you think we are as a country at risk of losing that essence of becoming like something else that we're not?
I think the thing with any country, and I remember when I wrote those two texts we were talking about back at the beginning, that's something I also said over there, is any country is mainly made of the people who make it. It's not an abstraction, it's not something you find in the atmosphere or in the air or in the clouds. Our country is mainly made of the people who live in it and who make that country. And that's also why I think, like, for example, the cultural presence we have now of people coming from Latin America in Madrid is something that enriches the city and makes it grow in a direction that wasn't forecasted so much or that didn't happen in the last few years. Like the fact that there's Latin American writers or cultural people who work in culture in general working at the head of many institutions. I'm thinking, for example, how Centro Conde Duque, a Center for Culture and the Arts, is directed right now by Jorge Volpi, brings also a different perspective to many things in Spain. It is really how, besides for everyone who comes here and lives in it and kind of really integrates themselves with the atmosphere of the city, that the governments of Madrid or the institutions of Madrid or the businesses of Madrid would try to make it too much this kind of place where you go for a really small amount of time or like a little while just on vacation and carefully craft this kind of city for you to go on vacation to, but that doesn't encourage any form of permanence or any form of staying in it kind of for the longer run. Like building a city that's just made for tourists. Like Madrid is not going to stop being the international city it has become, but the danger, I think, is when you take away the opportunity for the people really living here and turn it kind of into just this cosmetic backdrop or like a movie set almost of what Madrid is supposed to be like. And I think that's the risk in making everything completely catered to tourists, mostly in the center and city center of cities like Madrid. Not so much losing an essence, because cities are always in transformation and you can never really stop or hinder any such transformation, but much more in it ceasing to be a city for Madrilenians, wherever they come from, and to being much more a city for tourists.
And it seems like beyond Madrid, like a phenomenon that's
It's also
happening
in Barcelona,
yeah,
it's also in Valencia, it's in Spain in general, and it's really an understandable phenomenon. Like you can really see where the attractiveness of Spain in general is coming from, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Like the thing is that a lot of people are coming here as a tourist, but like also we're seeing a lot of people coming for economic opportunities, right? Like other type of migrants who are not tourists, who want to settle here to have better opportunities. It seems like there is also like this kind of like infight within the Spanish society when it comes to movements of people and like the people who make the society. It seems like the far right is against migrants because they believe it's changing the society in a way they don't like. It seems the left is not happy with mass tourism also because of the consequences of the impact of like the housing crisis, prices in general. Do you think also like the Spanish society is becoming less welcoming of people from other countries, whether they're like migrants or privileged migrants who are here as expats or digital nomads?
Yeah, I mean, like, still, if you compare it to any other country in Europe right now, and how the far right is kind of growing in those countries, and you compare like the recent Spanish legislation, like the government just went through this whole process of giving citizen rights to a lot of migrants who were here. I think something that really tells you that Spain still has, in a certain way, that sense of welcoming, deeply ingrained into what our culture and our values really are, is precisely that. That's something you would not see anywhere else in Europe. And that's something that would not be a current political debate anywhere else in Europe. But here in Spain, we do, even if it hasn't been without a lot of controversy, without a lot of discussion, which has happened. Also, our right and far right don't really know what to do about it in a certain way. Like, you find this really interesting arrangement of different wings of the right wing, where there's some of them who take an issue only with migrants who come, for example, from African countries, but welcome Latin American immigrants. And there's some others who kind of try to straddle and do this weird kind of equilibrium between both. Like, even if in Spain we're not exempt of racism and historical racism and many traits that are not precisely welcoming towards people from elsewhere or people who come here, I think culturally we're still precisely the most welcoming country in Europe and one of the most welcoming countries in the world, maybe. And I think that concern about how those movements of people may alter the housing crisis, how they may have an effect on the housing crisis, it's more really that affects almost anyone that lives here or wants to live here. Because the horizon that kind of creates is one where no one is able to live in the city. And it's only a question of how much money do you bring so as to be able to buy a place to live in the city. And that's something we have seen in other big cities around the world. But really, after the pandemic, it's a process that very much accelerated itself in the case of Madrid, and I think in the case of Barcelona. But I would still say Spain remains one of the most welcoming places to be, kind of.
And you've written a lot about identity and like the concept of being Spanish. Like you've talked about it in Melancholia and in articles you've written. I think something that makes Spain interesting when it comes to identity is our relationship with like the symbols, right? Like the national flag, the concept of like nationalism that maybe in other countries doesn't spark that many debates, right? As the society is changing, as more people from other countries are coming, our culture is also becoming more diverse. Do you think the concept of being Spanish, do you think the Spanish identity is also changing or will change in the coming years?
Yeah, I think it will. And it's already kind of changing. Precisely because of what I was saying earlier about how any nation is constituted by the people who really live in it. The share of the Spanish population in general that comes from elsewhere, or people here, Spaniards here, who are born from at least one of their parents being a migrant, has really grown over the last few years, and it's going to continue to grow because it's demographic movements that take place globally. And even if some politicians try to use them as kind of talking points to entice some hate or do something hateful about it, there's really no way to stop those demographic movements. And that's going to modify and resignify a lot of things about how the Spanish itself is thought about. Like, I think for a long time, for example, let's take this really pedestrian example of how to discuss it. Like the whole problematic or troublesome affair about speaking about convenience stores in Spain. If you go to Madrid or you go to Barcelona, there's a huge probability a few years ago everyone would have talked about una alimentación, a convenience store, in Madrid as a chino and in Barcelona as a paqui, like referring to them through the name or the nationality of the people who have those stores. And it's only in the last few years that has been kind of problematized. Like, it's not so obvious to refer to those shops in a kind of dehumanizing way, or just in the using the terms that you would use to speak about the nationality of where those people come from. And it's precisely because as time also passes, this intermixing and sense of belonging to a Spanish collective in a certain way, to Spain in general, that begins to kind of install itself, and there's no conscience about it. And besides the problems we're talking about and those issues with how in Europe and in the whole world, really, we've seen a wave of racism, of xenophobia spreading a certain sense through the world, I think Spain is doing a good job in general. The Spanish population is doing a better job than other countries in kind of reformulate what Spain itself means. I think this kind of diversity does not come as something weird to us, as something we have to get ourselves used to. But precisely this kind of openness to diversity, as it was, for example, in the case of LGBTQ rights, also applies in a really, really natural way.
What does it mean to be Spanish in 2026?
In the most basic of terms, and I tried in like a few years ago in Melancholia to come up with a definition of what some kind of patriotism about that could kind of mean, but I really think it mostly means like this kind of emotional disposition or effectiveness towards the idea of Spain in itself and Spain as a country, like kind of taking Spain or the country itself as a project, everyone being in Spain is a part of, a component of, something you cannot dissociate yourself of. And that without regards to where exactly you come from, where you're. It's more of a sense of belonging, really. And I think there's also something to appreciate, or something beautiful about precisely how an identity can be all the time in transformation. I think if you ask also the question to other places in the world, other places that have become really cosmopolitan places, like what does it mean to be from New York? What does it mean to be from Berlin? What does it mean to be from Paris? It's really hard to find a strong identitarian response, precisely because the population of those places has grown so diverse. And I think in that sense, this diversity is something that's enriching Spain and making the whole experience of Spain become something richer.
I think like lately also like identity is becoming like a talking point in politics. Like we're becoming more polarized also in our politics. It's not only in Spain, but like globally. You've also been very vocal about LGBTQ rights. And Spain, I think, has like a reputation for being a relatively safe or like positive country when it comes to legislation, but also social experiences for LGBTQ people. Do you worry that the backlash we're seeing in other countries when it comes to LGBTQ legislation or social attitudes could also arrive and reach Spain too eventually?
In one of the things we already do have in Spain, we have not been able to stay like completely apart from this political far-right wave that goes across the whole world. And in many regions of Spain, what in Spain we would call comunidades autónomas, somewhere from elsewhere, I may consider them just like regions. There's already governments in place, in regional governments, that precisely are constituted by the traditional right or center right and the far right government with them. And they've already put in place or tried to put in place that kind of legislation that rolls back on LGBT rights and so on. But I think the difference precisely with other countries, or the case of other countries where it hasn't always been the far right that proposed those rollbacks on LGBT legislation. There's even been left-wing rollbacks on LGBT legislation in places like the United Kingdom. The difference is in Spain, it's something so deeply embedded in what our culture and what our values kind of are. Even if this legislative approach may be possible, I think a whole social backlash or social rollback would really be impossible. Like if you compare, for example, the United States, how in this question precisely, the question was about equal marriage rights, how open they are to that, what a percentage of the population sees it favorably. I think in the United States, you would have something like 60% after the last data. And in Spain, it's 80%. Like Spain really has this openness to LGBTQ rights so deeply ingrained into who we are that trying to dismount that also after the whole experience of a dictatorship, which I think really marks our cultural predisposition in a particular way. Like it's something that really affects our history and how the whole culture in the transition and after the transition really came together. Something that's so clear and powerful to Spanish culture, like Almodovar in filmmaking, and something people from elsewhere really associate all the time with Spain, also has this thing about LGBTQ rights. I think it's very, very difficult to think about a profound social rollback, even if politically, of course, we are not immune to the same waves that go on elsewhere.
Elizabeth, you're very young, but also very vocal also about the opportunities for young people. Just a final question. Are you optimistic about the future ahead for Spanish youth?
Well, relatively, I think there are some things you can be optimistic about. There are some things you can not be optimistic about. I think, for example, in regards to the housing crisis, it's not so likely there's going to be neither a quick nor an easy solution to that in the horizon. I myself still live out of rent, and I don't have any houses and property, and I'm not going to inherit any, so I live this problem particularly myself, and like also being in Lavapiés, which is one of those neighborhoods really affected by gentrification. I don't know how much more time I'm going to be able to live in my neighborhood with the rent I'm paying right now. So it's really going to be an issue that doesn't only affect the youth in Spain, but I think the population in general, but the youth particularly. In regards to other things, in regards to that openness we're talking about, Spain is still going to be one of the best places you really can be and exist in a free way. I think there's a world ahead, there's a future ahead that's full of crisis and full of moments that are going to be hard. And the climate crisis, the housing crisis, those are not going to disappear. I think the youth can try to be hopeful without being optimistic, to try and create something better without thinking necessarily it's going to be forcefully better.
Yeah, we'll stay positive. We'll stay hopeful. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
For people who want to know more about you, should I go to your website, to your everywhere?
Yeah, website on Substack. And on the website, you have a link to the Substack, so it's connected. Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And that's it for today's episode. If you enjoyed it, hit follow and leave us a review and share it with your friends, please. And if you want to go deeper and support independent journalism, please consider becoming a paid subscriber to the Bubble newsletter. It makes a real difference. Thanks for watching or listening. We'll see you next time.